I like to start with a turnaround of the character I'll be sculpting. This shows me the proportions and details I need to keep in mind. I use mirror symmetry to keep both sides exactly the same. Even if the character ends up being asymmetrical, it's easy to edit in that asymmetry from existing symmetry. For the back view, I use the front view as a reference because they should have the same silhouette and thus consistent proportions. I don't have to do inking or shading, but it helps. Cleaner lines make for better reference, and the lighting gives the reference the illusion of three-dimensionality. The better your reference, the better your sculpt will be. From there, I do the side view, using the front and back views to line up elements like the eyes, limbs, and hair. Because the turnaround reference isn't the final product, nothing has to line up perfectly. Just enough that, when sculpting, there is consistency. I'm not going to print Sonic in the A pose, because that would be boring. Everyone has an A pose, but not everyone has a dynamic run like Sonic. So I need to sketch out reference of the pose I'll be putting Sonic in. The main thing is to make sure that the silhouette is as dynamic as can be in the reference. A strong silhouette is readable from every angle, and less reliant on details to fix after the fact. Sonic is a runner, and I want to imply that he's in the process of running, like we're catching him in a moment in time. I think that will make the end result more dynamic, unique, and interesting. Why did I change Sonic's design? I'm not very good at staying on model, and most of my appeal online is from my very specific style. So, rather than try to be good at something I'm not, I'm going to go my own way, and in the process, make some design changes that I would add or subtract from the original design. So, to recap, the design reference is a roadmap for our sculpture. I use front, back, and side views to line up proportions and create a pose reference to make the silhouette dynamic and interesting. And I want the design to feel unique, so I've made some changes that have gone away from Sega and Sonic Team's official model. Next step is to import the reference into the sculpting app and start blocking things out. First thing to sculpt is the head. I really should block out all the elements of the sculpt before doing detailing in the head, but there is something really satisfying about blocking out the head. If I have a really good head sculpt, it makes me more confident about the rest of the body. It also helps that the head is a major focal point, so a good head will hide future flaws. I start by using two spheres for both the cranium and the jaw. Once I have them, I then push and pull them into place using the move or grab tool. The goal is to make big moves and make smaller detail moves as they become necessary. This also extends to the resolution. I try to lower the resolution and only add higher resolution as it becomes necessary. This forces me to make big changes as well. Once I'm done with the general shape of the cranium and jaw, I then add in two UV spheres for eyes. I like using UV spheres because their poles are really good for the irises. I then clone the main spheres for the irises. This isn't how eyes work in real life, but it's good for 3D printing. The eyes don't have to be perfectly spherical because 1, it's a cartoon character, and 2, it's not going to be animated. Next are the ears and spine. There's not much to say about the ears other than I like using spheres because they are very dynamic in their utility. I could use cones for both the ears and spines, but I want Sonic to feel cute and cuddly, as per my style. So I'll just elongate the spheres and straighten them slightly to imply pointiness in a cute way. I'm also doing minor tweaks throughout the rest of the head as I catch them. Nothing is perfect, and it's good to make changes as I see them. And this is where the recording stopped working for me for some reason, and just stays stuck for the rest of the head. So we'll just skip ahead to the eyebrows and eyelashes. If you also record footage with your iPad, please let me know what you use and how you do it in the comments. I find that giving Sonic eyebrows and eyelashes on top of his head humanizes him and gives me more options for his expressions. It's not on model with either the official design or my own reference, but I can't be beholden to either. I have to do what's right for the sculpt people will actually be playing with. The print looking good is more important than it looking accurate. Let's talk about the torso. Normally, Sonic's torso is just a singular bean shape. And if I was doing anything else with this design other than sculpting, I would use the bean shape. However, I want to pose this character with rotations in the torso that would be difficult if the torso was one singular element. So I've broken it down into 3 parts: an upper torso or rib cage, a lower torso or belly, and the pelvis or groin. This allows me to give Sonic some bend in his spine by rotating the pieces, rather than having to push or pull the torso and hope it gives me the right curve. For his lower half, I've given Sonic pants and a belt on top of that. The pants are for consistency with the female characters in the series. Because there's nothing inherently important about that region on male characters, there's nothing drastically changed by giving him pants. The pants also act as a focal point separator for his upper and lower body, and the belt accentuates this even more so. This is why a lot of superhero characters have belts, even when their outfits should, theoretically, not need it. As for his chest fur window, it gets the same treatment as the upper and lower torso. In the past, I used to meld these elements together, but the method of rendering and printing I'll be using will make it hard to notice that these are separate pieces, unless you're watching a video like this. So I'll keep them separate, as a form of non-destructive editing, unless I absolutely need to merge them together. The feet are tricky in this particular application because I want the bottoms to be flat, but not so flat that the edges become hard. To do this, I use masking to only affect the bottoms of the feet, and then scale the region down, so the curve is more noticeable. I don't scale it all the way down to become completely flat though. This took a few tries, which are sped up in this time lapse. It takes a while to learn how to get everything right on the first try. The cuffs, or are they socks? Whatever. The sock cuffs are simple spheres, as part of my established pattern of using spheres for everything, that are pushed and pulled into the general shape that I want. I then use a crease tool to carve in the folds. I'm not sculpting the actual leg holes into the socks because it's not something that will be noticeable from the average view distance of the figure after it is 3D printed. Like the torso, the feet are also broken into segments for posability. I got lucky in that the foot straps hide the division between the ball and heel of the foot. I've also reused the belt buckle for the buckle on the shoes as well. If you can reuse something, you absolutely should, instead of rebuilding it from scratch. And you'll see that, when I get to the arms, I'll be reusing the sock cuff for the glove cuffs too. Now that I've established the positioning of the feet, I can start blocking out the legs. I'm using a tube instead of blocking out spheres for the thighs, knees, and calves. This is because Sonic is a noodle-limbed character whose individual leg anatomy is not very distinct. Breaking the legs into thighs, calves, and knees would make this version feel overly muscled, and that's not what we're going for. Once the legs are blocked in, I can build the sleeves and cuff of his shorts to match the legs using cylinders. It is also at this point that I do some connecting of parts, or parenting. Parenting refers to connecting elements in a digital workflow to each other so that one element, the child, follows the information of another, the parent. This is a good way to minimize the amount of individual selection and reposing you'll have to do to the sculpt. It will also come in handy for organizing, especially for the filter I'm using to mirror the legs so I don't have to sculpt them twice. It is also handy for when I break the mirror filter and need my legs organized by their parenting. So, for the arms, I'm going to start with spheres for shoulders, even though Sonic doesn't normally have shoulders, to make them easier for arm rotations. I'm also going to reuse the sock cuffs for the glove cuffs so I don't have to resculpt them from scratch. Once those are set, I just use a tube to connect the shoulders and wrists to make the arm. No biceps, forearms, or elbows because I don't want our noodle-limbed cartoon mouse to feel too muscular. The palms are tricky because I don't want to have to make any adjustments later to how they fold when I get into posing. I'm going to flex them into a fist rather than a neutral pose and then make minor tweaks when I add the fingers. Speaking of the fingers, this is where I had a lot of trouble for a few reasons. For starters, fingers are just hard in general. If you think just drawing them is hard, wait till you have to sculpt and pose them. For these fingers, I'm using tubes rather than breaking down the individual phalanges into sculpted spheres. This makes them more organic and smooth at the cost of posability, due to how this particular app handles tubes. Their anchor points were not meant to be manipulated in this fashion, which is making the process more difficult. You can even see some restarts where I either tried a different method or simply redid it, but better. As I've mentioned before, it takes practice to get to a point where you can do everything right on the first try. But the more important thing isn't having to do it over again, it's eventually getting it right. So keep trying as many times as it takes. Once I figure out how I'm going to do one finger, I make 3 other linked clones for the other fingers. There's no point in redoing the same process 4 times when I have a perfect one that I can just duplicate to reuse later. Once the fingers are figured out, I parent everything and pose everything accordingly for the A pose, and we're good. Sonic's neck is pretty simple. A rounded cylinder, and you're done. Normally Sonic, and other characters like him, don't have a neck, but it's easier for posing to give him one, and pretty easy to hide otherwise. Helping this is the neckerchief I've given him. It gives Sonic a more adventurous feel, and helps break up the focal shapes like his head and upper body. Posing is tricky, not because of the pose itself, but because this particular software does not have the infrastructure necessary for posing assets in a practical manner. As such, we will have to compensate. When posing, I like to start with the center of gravity in the lower groin or pelvis, and work my way out from there. The character has to feel like they are grounded in some kind of space, but if I start with the feet or legs, the torso tends to end up very wonky, which makes everything else super wonky too, since everything extends from the torso. So I start with the torso, then work my way up to the upper torso, then the neck, and finally the head. We will circle back to the expression later. For the legs, I start by placing the feet where I want them to be, and then re-angling the legs to match. With the shorts, this isn't that big of a deal, but it is a problem for the legs. Luckily, it's not too big of a deal to take the tube endpoints and connect them to the pelvis and sock cuffs. After that, it's a matter of manipulating the anchor points of the tubes so that the curves feel natural or organic. From there, I angle the ball of the foot to match the pose in my reference. I'm not too worried about the feet being completely flat in space or overlapping the ground because 1, almost no one's feet are completely flat on the ground, and 2, the overlap will make the print feel much more stable later. Next is the arms. It's the same process as the legs. Place the hands first, and then make the arms match. The arms tend to come second to the legs, or last, because there's no pressure on them. They usually hang in midair, and thus are free to extend how they want without affecting the rest of the body. If the legs don't work, the rest of the pose is messed up. But if the hands don't work, I can always readjust. If Sonic was balancing from his hands, with weight placed on them, I would do the hands and arms first, and then the legs second. And now onto the expression. I'm very nervous about messing with the face, so I use a feature called a shape key. Well, in this software, it's called a layer, but the functionality is similar to that of a shape key, so I'm going with that for universal convenience. When messing with the facial expression, it's important to check it from all angles, not just the front or just the side. This will be 3D printed, so it needs to look good from every angle. I push down the brow first, and then pull them forward, so it doesn't look like Sonic's skull has caved in. Afterwards, I adjust Sonic's new eyebrows and eyelashes to match. So now, I add a base plate. This is for stability when printing. I could print without it, sure, but then it absolutely would not stabilize. At least, not consistently. This is also where that overlap with the feet comes in. By overlapping the feet with the plate, I don't have to worry about balance because Sonic will grow out of the plate when it prints and thus never fall over. I'm also giving Sonic the visual effect of his figure 8 super peel out. I'm always a sucker for these kinds of tangible visual effects, and I don't see it often enough in the merchandise, so I'm making my own. The goal is to make it match the existing leg posing as much as possible, while also having it intertwine with the legs, while also not having it overlap with the legs or feet so much that those elements disappear. It's a tricky balance, but worth it. The last thing to do is add colors and lighting. For printing, this isn't strictly necessary, but it makes the sculpt a lot more presentable for anybody looking at the render. The first step is to add base colors to everything. I try to grab as many objects that share the same color as possible before coloring them because it makes it a lot easier than grabbing things one by one. Plus, if I've missed anything, it's a lot more noticeable and thus easier to fix. I've given Sonic's arms the full blue treatment because I think, in a post-3D world, it makes him a lot more consistent with everyone else in the world, design-wise. For the elements of his clothing that are traditionally white, I go with a not quite white color, like an almost white blue. This is because black and white, as colors, tend to pull focus to a negative extent when overused. So I save them for elements I want the viewer to focus on. This is usually facial elements like the eyes and teeth. Everything else gets the off-white color. There are certain areas on the sculpt that I want to be shadowed, such as under Sonic's quills or leading into his sock and glove cuffs, and which I know will never be illuminated enough to be lit. For these areas, I use vertex painting to paint on the shadows. This provides an extra layer of contrast for the color range of that object. That being said, it's a bad idea to overdo or overuse this technique, so I save it for areas where it will barely be noticed on a casual observation. Next is the VFX of the Super Peel-Out or Figure 8. After coloring it to mimic the legs, I then change its material properties and how it interacts with the scene. I make its rendering additive, which takes away its solidity, and then lower the opacity to make it feel like more of a blur. From there, it's time for lighting. First, I turn off the environment so I know exactly how much effect my lights are having. I then add a primary light to focus on Sonic's main visible features, and then a secondary light with less power and contrasting color to highlight anything not focused on by the main light. 2 more lights for a smooth transition between my primary and secondary lights, and I'm good. From there, it's time for some color adjustment using post-processing. This process of tweaking colors, lighting, and render values gives the render of the sculpt a more cinematic feel, instead of feeling like a plastic experiment. The key is not to make too many drastic changes, but to keep them as minimal as possible. Your eyes, audience, and sculpt will thank you for it. Lastly, there's some minor posing tweaks to make even after everything is done. An artist's work is never done, and after giving the sculpt some time to breathe, I come back and make minor tweaks that make the sculpt more dynamic and give it a stronger silhouette. Throughout this process, I've taken breaks and also made minor tweaks behind the scenes that weren't recorded. As projects get more intensive, it's a good idea to take breaks between steps, and a bad idea to always do every project in one go. Time away lets you come back with a fresh perspective and spot things you wouldn't have noticed while you were hyper-focused. That being said, after a certain point, done is done, and you need to call the project finished and move on. And now that the sculpt is done, it's time for printing. Because I'm printing in color, the print actually took a full 24 hours. Don't worry, I didn't spend all that time waiting by the printer. Once the printing is done, it's time to snip off the supports, and bam! One fully colored Sonic Foamiibo. What did you think? Got questions? Who should I sculpt next? Drop a comment and let me know. If you like what you saw, please leave a like, please subscribe, and share it with your friends. Also, check out the links in the outro and description for ways to support the channel and or get your own 3D prints. See you on the flip, skip out!